Do I need to shout? No, I don't need to shout. Yeah, I can see thumbs up at the back. Well, there's a definitely hush around, which means that it must be time for us to start the annual general meeting. We are running 4 minutes late, but we will get through it as quickly as we can, but covering all the important areas. So, first of all, I'd like to welcome everybody to the first physical meeting that we've had for 2 years, which is just absolutely staggering. And it's just really wonderful to be able to see all of you again in the flesh after so long, and all looking hale and hearty, and may you all stay so over the next year. Both Joyce and I have had COVID a few weeks ago, and we've now recovered, so hopefully we're okay well into the summer holidays. And that's the only good thing about getting it as far as I can see. But welcome, everyone. I'd like to particularly thank Dr. Mike Branscombe for allowing us to use the church this evening. It means that people can spread out a little bit more, and also the village hall, when we applied to have the AGM there, they wanted us to wash the floor before everybody arrived, and then wash the floor after they all left. Well, we could wash the floor after they left, but if we washed the floor before they arrived, they'd be sliding all over the place. So we were told we could ignore all that, but of course if it's down and there is a problem or an accident, we would have been on the hook. So thank you, Mike, for coming to our rescue, and we've made a small donation. And Mike says that there is a hearing loop for anybody if they need it. Now, the audio visuals that we have in the church are at a totally different level of quality than we're used to in the village hall. And we're very grateful. Hopefully, you've all got access to a screen, and so there's no excuse that I will be testing you on the financials later on. There is no reason why you shouldn't have understood and everything. Now, normally when we have a problem, I call for Richard Mulhall. Richard, come and sort this out if there's a problem with the audios or the microphone or the visuals. I can't do that tonight. If there's a problem with any of this, I'm afraid it's just an act of God. We decided we wouldn't have a raffle tonight, and we decided that we wouldn't charge for the wine and so on afterwards, but instead we would ask that you make, if you so wish, a small donation to the Ukrainian fund as a reflection that we are also lucky to be here whilst they are all having such an unspeakably terrible time over there. So please feel free. There are a couple of plates and a bowl. Feel free to show your support should you so wish. And of course, today is exactly 2 years from the lockdown, and that is also worth thinking. And very many of us, probably all of us here, will have lost somebody that they knew, a relation, a friend, a parent, to COVID. And of course it was tragic in our own case that we lost our own David Belchamber, must be now about 8 or 9 months ago. And he has left a massive void. And we just reflect how lucky we were to have known such a wonderful man. And as so often with people, you only really learn how wonderful they are after they have passed away. And we were very, very lucky to have him as our planning advisor, not only just us, but the Chatterbus had him as the secretary. He was involved in Transition Cobham, he was involved in the community garden, the Royal British Legion, and so on and so forth. So he was a real loss to the community. So, you know, although COVID is now fairly mild, one just reflects that it hasn't been mild for the whole of the 2 years. I just want to make one small point. The Heritage Trust is a wholly non-political organisation. Quite a few of the things we might be discussing tonight have political overtones or undertones. but will all of you please support me in keeping politics totally out of any of the discussions this evening, please? And I know that we've got two candidates who will be fighting one of the seats in May, and I just ask you just to respect and listen to the discussions. I'm sure this causes no problem. We are so grateful for everything that each of our councillors has done from whatever party over the last few years. It's been tremendous. We are so lucky in Cobham to have a group of councillors who are so attuned to our needs and our concerns. And one councillor who can't be with us is James Brown. I don't think James has arrived, has he? I know he's trying to get here, but I think he's been up north. You know, he has talked to us every single meeting virtually about how he'd like to see the shape of the local plan. And he is now retiring. And I am pleased to say that all the things that he was wanting have pretty well come to pass. And I'd just like to pay particular credit to James for all he's done for our community in the long period that he has been a councillor. So let us now move on to the formal business. Can I take, please, the notice of the meeting as read? Is that okay? Thank you very much indeed. Apologies. We've got a few apologies. Chances are I can't find them. Yes, I can find them. David Cook, our secretary, is unable to be with us, but I believe we're recording tonight's meeting, and we'll be making it available to our other members who haven't been able to get here tonight. And David will be doing his minute secretary job from the recording. So others, Jeffrey Forrester, Mr. and Mrs. Peter Kelly, Ray Lee, Ian Nelson, David Taylor, Ross Thomas, James Vickers, Peter and Bobby Brazier, Brian and Shirley Carton, Nora Bethel have all given their apologies. The minutes of the last meeting of the AGM, which was held virtually, have been on our website. Can I take them as approved, please? Or does anybody have any concerns about their accuracy? That's jolly good, because I wouldn't be able to answer the questions anyway. The next item on the agenda is to receive the chairman's report. I'll be brief because you will have read our magazines, our newsletters regularly, and you'll be aware of the various things that have been going on. The local plan has taken up a lot of our time, and a number of us have been involved with it. Adrian, well, first of all, David Belchamber, of course, and then Adrian Wise, David Tipping has been involved. I've been involved myself. We've been working closely with Steve Wood of the CDRA, and I'm delighted to see Steve with us this evening. Thank you for coming along, Steve. So we've had a really good Cobham involvement on the local plan. We then were involved in corralling probably the majority of the residents' groups and the civic groups from around Elmbridge into a single group to deal with the advancement of the local plan. And we started our work in February of a year ago, and we were looking at a totally different landscape then. So we have really made a lot of grounds for moving forward. And in the last few months, Ruth Lyon from Thames Ditton has arranged a series of meetings, first with Dominic Rabb, and then with Bruce MacDonald at the council. And I'm very grateful to you, Ruth, because this has enabled us as an Elbridge community to give our views and our thoughts right at the top. And I think it's fair to say, acting at a strategic level, I think we have seen pretty well everything we wanted to see in the plan at a strategic level. And so I'd like to feel that actually the community has done its bit as far as this plan is concerned. On detailed planning matters, of course, you know, we've been involved throughout the year on a large number of items, and of course the one I suppose that worries us most is Wisley at the big end. Then at the small end we've been involved all the time with the developments at Cedar House, and we can now move towards seeing a resolution to that, and I think we will see that going out maybe for a further consultation shortly. But for the first time, I feel confident that maybe in 3 months' time, the worries of Cedar House will be at an end. There probably will not be the new developments that Clarity had wanted on the boundary. It'll probably maybe just be the main house itself, but it'll be a great move forward if it can be brought off. And so when it goes out for consultation, if it is, as I think it will be, I hope that our members and everybody else will absolutely vote in favour of that going through, because we really must get Cedar House occupied again before it again suffers further dilapidation. Moving away from houses and developments, River Hill has required time in keeping it going, and David Tipping has been much involved in all those sort of areas, and the footpath up through to the Tilt. Sue Prentice continues to be much involved in all our other footpaths, and you know, Joyce and I were just remarking yesterday how beautiful the path that we created at the bottom of the Tilt up Lee Hill Road, to the left of Lee Hill Road. It is absolutely stunning at this time of year. And of course, other work on footpaths, doing a lot at the moment on the footpath behind Reed School, and hopefully work on that will start soon as well. We've also been involved in the Samuelson Memorial in Chatley Woods, and hopefully that'll be more accessible. We're grateful to Lawrence for his work on the litter picking. This is an important part of the heritage and conservation, and it's wonderful not only that we have regular litter picks, but there's so many other litter picks going on around Cobham and Downside and so on. We continue on the blue plaques. We need somebody to come forward and take over the blue plaques. It's a very pleasant job. There's not too much to do, but we've got about 4 or 5 blue plaques that we'd like to get moving. We're only held up because we have nobody to do it. And the last one we put up was the old White Lion, otherwise known as the Vermont Exchange, at the bottom of Between Streets. But it is important that we recognize our historic buildings and the people who used to live there, because you know, history is important. It helps define a community as that community moves forward. We've been active on the book side. World War I book, Cobham Remembers, has been selling well, and World War II, Cobham Remembers World War II. It seems to have very long memories because it's taking ages to get the book into print. How far away do you think we are, Richard, on
Probably about a month.
About a month away, but it's worth the wait. I promise you it's worth the wait. And so that should be available at our next meeting. We continue to work with Elmbridge Museum and the schools, but again we need somebody to step forward to help us on the schools, because we need more resource there. We've just started a couple of weeks ago. Ita Lawton, who handles the historical side, has started doing tours of Cobham for other villages, and we had a group from Cranley a couple of weeks ago, and we started off here, and Mike gave a really uplifting talk about St Andrews, and we have so much to show people who come, and we have another group booked for June, and taking them round, we'll show them the mill as well in operation. And so, you know, this we want to see a lot more of, because we're very proud of our community, we're proud of our history, and we're proud of what we can offer. So that's been active. We're also going to be having a historical content to Jubilee Day, which will be a presentation in the church of the shops in Cobham over the years. It might be quite interesting if we've got the records. I was remarking to one of the shopkeepers, I remember about 10 years ago, everyone was complaining about all the estate agents and how they'd taken over. Maybe it's a bit over 10 years ago. And now, of course, it's everything that is health-related is taking over. And isn't it interesting how times change, people's habits change, and it's not always, one shouldn't always fight change. One often must go along with change. But it's been quite fascinating to see how that goes. And of course, we've been very active as far as our own newsletter is concerned, with Sally Ollett doing an excellent job with each edition is better than the other. I just don't know how you do it, Sally, but you do, so please keep it up. And then, of course, we're going to be very active again. We've missed Heritage Day the last 2 years, but Elizabeth Kennedy, and she'll be talking a little bit later, we'll be talking about it's not going to be Heritage Day this year, it's going to be Jubilee Day on the 4th of June. And so that, in a nutshell, is what we've been up to over the last year. So if it's all right with you all, we'd like to now move on to receive the Treasurer's report and then adopt the annual report. And so I'll ask our Treasurer, Sue Graves, to cover that for us, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jerry. This will be brief. We've had a second year with no Heritage Day or no face-to-face meetings, so our income in 2021 was quite modest, but then so was our expenditure, so we've still ended the year with a small surplus. At the end of the year, our membership subscriptions plus the donations were actually at a similar level to 2020, and which taking advance payments into account. And that was our major source of income this year, providing nearly £9,000. So many thanks to everyone who has joined or renewed their memberships. As Jerry's already mentioned, Heritage Day sadly had to be cancelled, but we're looking forward to the Queen's Jubilee celebrations on the 4th of June. Advertising revenue from our quarterly newsletters was the other major source of income this year. Thanks to Joyce for her diligence in getting local advertisers to support us. And book sales, as Jerry has already mentioned, is a very useful source of income. What have we spent the money on? We had a very small amount of Heritage Day expenses because there were some small items that had to be incurred at the start of the year before we knew that we would definitely be cancelling. Planned projects have had to be changed or postponed, but as Jerry mentioned, we're still hoping that a footpath upgrade will go ahead this year instead of last year. And we continued to fund the ongoing repair and maintenance work at Riverhill, and we paid for some extra tree surgery work, which was very much needed. As in previous years, we made a donation to the Poppy Appeal, and we paid for printing of the quarterly newsletters, and other expenses were other printing and postage and the public liability insurance. So the net result for the year was a cash surplus of just under £1,000. We still have to claim the gift aid on your subscriptions, so that hopefully will be another approximately £2,000 for each of the last 2 years. So our resources at the year end were just over £45,000, which is a good situation to be in. And of that, we've reserved £3,000 for future maintenance of Riverhill and the Riverside Path, £20,000 for local plan, green belt and planning support work, and £10,000 for other projects. And we've got some reserves left over to cover other expenses and future projects. So thank you very much to all our members and supporters and sponsors for your generosity, which is always very much appreciated. And many thanks to Victor Isles, who did a very thorough job on examining these accounts, and I'm very grateful to him for his time and patience and expertise in going through all the figures and making constructive recommendations. I'm happy to take any questions, easy questions, if there are.
Any questions at all? Well, thank you, Sue, for presenting that so clearly. It's quite a job to keep the accounts all up to date with everything that is going on. Thank you very much for doing it. As Sue has alluded, Victor Isles has carried out a thorough review. I'm delighted to see you here this evening, Victor. Thank you for coming. That you're in the front. Thank you for coming along. Nice to see you as well, Marilyn. And Victor sent to the board his detailed report after he completed his work, and I'm pleased to say that it was a clean report, that he didn't find any material errors or weaknesses in the accounts. He made a few points. He picked up that Sue's got to get the gift aid side sorted out, and you tell me that that will be done by the end of March, so that'll then be absolutely up to date when you come to look at things next year, Victor. Victor also thought we need to look a bit more carefully as we analyse our reserves and say where we're going to spend the money in the future. It's a difficult area, but some of the figures hadn't changed for a year or two, and so we maybe ought to just reflect on that. Those are the main issues, and more importantly, he's prepared to be our examiner again next year. Thank you very much indeed for that, Victor. So could I please ask somebody to propose the adoption of the accounts? Alistair Mann proposed it. Could I have a seconder, please? Philip Bayes as a seconder. Thank you very much indeed. Those in favour? I see a sea of hands. Anybody against? Thank goodness for that. Jolly good. Excellent. So next is to re-elect the directors retiring by rotation, who are all standing again, and that is myself, Joyce. Where are you, Joyce? Does everybody know you? Do you want to stand up so people can see you? They may not want to vote you in, so you better stand up so they can see you. Joyce looks after a whole raft of things, including the advertising on the newsletter and also the historical representative as far as families are concerned, because we have quite a lot of people who write in wanting information and so on. And also works hard in supporting us on all our events and activities. Sally Ollett comes up for renewal. Sally, could you please stand up, please, so everybody can see you? Sally is our newsletter editor. Don't you dare vote her down, because then we'd be in a real boat. And as I said, we have a wonderful newsletter, and we're really grateful to the effort. These things don't come quickly. Sue Graves, well, you've just heard Sue presenting the account. She comes up for re-election. It'd probably be best to take all of these together, if that's all right. And I'll ask David now to take the microphone and ask for a proposer and seconders. I'm one of those to be elected.
Well, there may be somebody else who wants to do it. There may be. I mean, I would like to say thank you to, especially to Jerry, who wields the whip. It's very interesting that the first meeting of the trust was held in this church. It's about 16 years ago, I think. So we're all 16 years older, and some of us look it. I'm sorry, and some of us perhaps don't feel any older. But it's my privilege to support these people who do such a tremendous job of work, and I'm certainly happy to nominate them, and I'm sure perhaps a show of hands will agree with this. Make sure everybody puts your hand up, please. Thank you very much. you're elected.
Thank you very much indeed, David, and thank you for those kind words. We have two directors retiring this year. They've been with us for a long, long time. Nora Bethel, who can't be with us, she's had terrible health recently and is still not out of the woods. And she, as you know, looks after all our distribution of the newsletter, and previously used to look after the volunteering until a couple of years ago. And so she'll be standing down. And an equal long-standing member is standing down, that's dear Edna Tipping. Edna has been with us from the start. Edna was first of all the publisher of the newsletter, and then she took over as membership secretary and has been the face of Cobham Conservation and Heritage Trust as far as all our new members and existing members are concerned. And one of the reasons we have well over 1,000 members is because of Edna and the polite way that she's dealt with everything, absolute timely way. Even her printer catches fire from time to time. Literally. Her husband says he catches fire, but we don't know whether that's because of, well, what's the cause of that. No, but seriously, Edna has been such a force for good in the Heritage Trust. And where are you, Edna? Where are you hiding? Can you please come up here so everybody can see you? If they don't already know you, I've got just a little something for you. Well done, Edna. Congratulations. We've got a little card that lots of people here tonight have signed.
Yes. Take me all night.
And it will take you all night. And we've got a balloon for you. Hang on. Well, I was clearing out the cellar. And I found a box full of duck tickets, and it says on it, Edna Tipping's box, please return, thank you. Here's your box back after 10 years. Thank you very much indeed. Well done. We've got a little voucher for you somewhere as well. Oh, here it is. Edna.
Lovely,
Thank you. So we're now getting towards the end of the formal business, and we need to appoint an examiner to examine the accounts for next year. I'd like to propose Victor Isles, who has indicated his willingness to stand. Could I have a seconder, please? David Tipping to second. Will you all show your approval? Thank you very much. Well done, Victor. Thank you very much indeed. Is there any other formal business we need to consider this evening? Jolly good. I'll therefore close the annual general meeting, and delighted to say, even though we started 4 minutes late, we have managed to catch 2 of those minutes back up again. And we will now move on to the informal business, part 2 of the agenda. Thank you, David. Don't go too far away in case we need you. Thanks very much, Sue. And perhaps I could ask Adrian Wise and Catriona Riddell to come up here, please. Right, we're now on to part 2, and I'm delighted to welcome Catriona Riddell, who is a chartered town planner who has probably more experience of local plans than anybody else in the country. Lucky you, but also lucky us, because Catriona lives in, is it Thames Ditton? Lives in Thames Ditton, And our group of residents associations and civic groups that I was talking about has been so privileged and lucky to have Catriona to help us along the line in all our discussions with Elmbridge. And I don't think I'm telling stories out of court that Elmbridge Council have also enjoyed some of your help and support along the way as well. Maybe. As well as work that Catriona does for Surrey County Council, for numerous other councils up and down the land, and has so much experience over local plans, what works and what doesn't work. And I can't think of anybody better to tell us what the local plan means for us and where we go from here. And if one looks at it at the macro level, we've come a long way. We were all last together here in this church. It must have been, what, about 4 years ago, when we were looking how were we going to protect the places like Chipping's Farm, where there could have been 500 houses, just off Blundell Lane, where there could have been another few hundred houses. And we were looking at the savaging of our green belt against a housing target that was something like over 600 houses. It actually went up to 700 for a short period of time. And the latest plan that received the approval, unanimous approval of all councillors yesterday, has a target in of 450 odd houses and absolutely not one blade of green belt to be released either. So that was a really good way forward. But of course, it's the moment all writing on pieces of paper. The next stage, of course, is the inspector. And how robust is this plan as far as the inspector is concerned? And then if we're going to have an intensification of housing, are we going to get good design? Are Elmbridge really serious in saying that they can grapple with and deliver good design? Because they haven't in the past. And so that is worrying. Everybody gets very excited about the allocation of sites, and I'm sure a few people have something to say. I'm not quite so worried about that, because sites they come and go, and we always have windfall sites in this borough. But anybody who thinks that Waitrose is going to sell up tomorrow for housing, it's just a load of rubbish. Of course they're not going to sell up for housing. But if people's buying habits change so dramatically over the next 11 years, there won't be the need for the size of Waitrose that we have at the moment, or a remodeling of it, and maybe dealing with car parking elsewhere might make room for other uses, and likewise on Sainsbury's. But there's got to be a change in consumer habits for this sort of thing to happen. What is much more important, and what you all should be more considering, rather than Waitrose and Sainsbury's in 11 years' time may be changing, what you need to be worried about are all the garages that are proposed to be got rid of. Where are the cars going to park that are using those garages? They're going to be replaced by houses. Where are the cars belonging to those houses going to be parked? These are the issues that people need to be worrying about. And secondly, every bit of land owned by Elmbridge and Surrey, we have got to be certain is used for a proper purpose within this community. We have suffered over the years because authority-owned land has not been wisely used. The Cedar Road development of the new library, it was lovely to get a new library there, but we could have got more community space. We needed more community space, and we couldn't get it. We were just shoehorned into the minimum, and the rest was expensive housing. And so that, I would argue, was a misuse of authority land. And we do not want to see this happening on the remaining bits of land, because once that land goes, it's gone. And if we're going to get more housing in the area, we need better facilities in this area. Maybe different facilities. But somebody needs to make sure, before all this land goes, that it is a sensible proposition. But that's the detail. Let's move back from the detail now and talk about the plan itself and where we go from here. And Catriona, you're the expert. You know more than any other person in this room on the subject. I'm delighted that you're with us. Do you want to go to the lectern and use that?
Will it work? Hello? Can you all hear me? Yes. Thanks for having me tonight. My job tonight is quite simple. It's to make you leave thinking planning is the best thing in the world and planners are all fantastic. So if you leave smiling tonight and you think even an ounce of planning is a good thing, then I'll have done my job, because I have to say it's a really, really dispiriting job at the moment for a lot of planners. It's a hard job, and you know, anybody that sits around the dinner table, we always just tell everybody we're an estate agent now. We just don't bother even saying that we're a planner. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about my role, what I do, talk about the current planning system in hopefully an exciting way and not too dry. That will be hard. And then a little bit about what the government is planning for planning, where things are going, and then finish off with a little bit about Elmbridge local plan, and Jerry sort of set the scene nicely for that, you know, how we got here, where we're going. I'm not going to get involved in any site specifics around Cobham. I'll leave that to the gentleman here. But I will sort of talk a little bit about what the local plan includes in general terms. And yeah, we've still got a long way to go on that. So I've been, despite my accent, lived in Elmbridge for 30 years. My children have grown up here, went to school here. So, you know, the Elmbridge local plan is, I've got self-interest, so I didn't just give all my time for free because it was a good thing. I have a huge amount of self-interest. I want the Elmbridge local plan to be as good as it possibly can be. And, you know, a lot of us have invested a huge amount of time to get it to where it is now, but it has still got a long way to go. So I started many, many years ago with Surrey County Council, and I spent 16 years. If anybody wants any advice on planning applications, don't come to me, because I've never done a planning application in my life. I am what they call a special planner, so I do policy, local plans, and in a former life at Surrey County Council I did what was called a structure plan. And some of you might remember structure plans. I know Ruth certainly remembers structure plans. These were strategic plans for the whole of the county, and they had some really important roles to play. The first one was to sort out where all the housing goes. So it wasn't done at a very local level, it was done at the county level, and it was divvied up to each of the districts. The second really important role that it did, and this is something that I'll come back to later, is that it set what we called the general extent of the Greenbelt. So it looked at the Greenbelt, and it looked at it from a metropolitan London perspective, and it looked at it from a Surrey perspective, and it looked at how much growth was needed, how many new houses were needed, and it looked at where the best place to do that was. So it's not the same as we have now, where all 11 districts look at their own little bit of Greenbelt and decide. This was done at a county level. And in the last structure plan, which I was in charge of, which is 2004, that set the general extent of the Greenbelt, and there was always a very strong view that you just didn't touch the Greenbelt within the M25 and around about that, because that's where it was most fragmented, and that's where it was most under pressure, and more importantly, that is where it played that really critical role of separating Surrey with London, so you didn't touch that. So the last structure plan did suggest some changes to the Greenbelt, and that was mainly around Guildford. Guildford residents didn't like it, and I remember standing in front of about 300 very angry residents. I was 6 months pregnant at the time, and my counsellor said to me, look, you just do that front presentation, I'll take the heat, you just stand back. And as soon as the first person stood up and started shouting, divide and rule, he immediately took a back step, pushed me forward. It wasn't a pleasant experience, but it is the nature of the game for a lot of planners, especially if you're in charge of a local plan. You have to go out and talk to communities, and you have to take an awful lot of the flack, which isn't often a nice place to be. The Labour government in 2004 decided that they didn't want structure plans anymore, So they introduced regional planning. So it was to do a similar job to structure plans, but it was elevated to, in our case, it was a south-east basis. So it was a very large area from Oxfordshire down Hampshire all the way around to Kent, and literally right round, wrapped round most of London, apart from sort of Hertfordshire and Kent. And that was, again, to do a similar job. It set the general extent of the green belt. It decided where the main growth areas were going to go, where major expansion was going to happen. So there was a lot of development proposed around Ashford in Kent, and a lot around Milton Keynes and Aylesbury. That didn't last very long, so I ended up being Director of Planning at the region there, and in 2010 the coalition government got rid of that. So I decided to set up my own business, because every job I had I got made redundant, or the system sort of disappeared. So I decided it wasn't a very good idea to stick with that, and decided to set up my own business. So today I spend a lot of the time working with local authorities across the country, and I'm talking about England because England has a very specific planning system, different to Scotland and Wales and Ireland. So I work with councils all over the country, helping them develop their local plans. I'm mainly what they call a strategic planner, so I work with groups of councils, and my job is more marriage guidance counselling than planning. My job is to knock heads together, groups of authorities, groups of local authorities, and get them to work together and collaborate together. So a lot of what I do is around the relationship management side of things. It's working with councillors and officers and all sorts of stakeholders as well, different partners, to get them to think about long-term visions, what they want their place to be like and how they're going to get there. I love my job. I do really, really enjoy my job. I know it's difficult for some people to understand, but when we get it right, we get it right, because our job is to place shape. It's to help places change in a good way. It's to help them grow in a good way. And a lot of the talk we have is around good growth, and that can mean many different things to many different people, but fundamentally it's about making things happen in a good way. And a lot of it is very much about bringing communities along with us, and that is the heart of the matter. It's not us and them. It's about bringing everybody along on the journey, and that means compromise. That also means that councils have to make decisions in the interest of the greater good, and these are often very difficult decisions about investment priorities, where you're going to put growth, where you're going to put a new road, and things like that. Wisley was mentioned. In the old structure plan, Wisley was considered and kicked a mile along the road because it just didn't work in the structure plan. It wasn't the right place. It was then reconsidered in the South East plan, which was the regional strategy, and again it was kicked into the long grass because it was not considered a suitable place for housing. We are where we are now. It's there. It's now in the Guildford local plan, and that's going to be an issue, I suspect, when we get to the Elmbridge plan as well. Even though it's not in Elmbridge, it will probably become an issue because it's right on particularly your doorstep. So I do have an interesting job, but we are in constant flux. The current system that we've got, and this is the one that Elmbridge are preparing their local plan, came about in 2010 when the coalition came in, and localism, all remember localism? That was all about devolving all decisions to the local level, and with the view that you would get a better result. And I'll read this because I love these quotes from 2010. This was Mr. Pickles, Eric Pickles, who was in charge of planning. And he said, "This government is committed to localism and greater local decision making in planning. The flawed top-down targets of regional planning, centrally imposing development upon communities, built nothing but resentment. They will hang over our communities no more." And then Grant Shapps, who was the housing minister at the time, said, "The localism bill will end top-down targets. In their place, communities with the vision and drive to build more homes will be given the freedom to achieve their ambitions, and this will be backed up with powerful cash incentives for councils that allow new development in the area." And it all went swimmingly well. Didn't go well anywhere, and it hasn't gone well anywhere, because asking local councils to make decisions about housing numbers is like asking, well, what's the phrase? Turkeys?
Voting for Christmas.
Voting for Christmas, thank you. It is because councillors are living in their communities, next door to their friends, their family, and they're asking to make some really, really difficult decisions around these housing numbers. But we've got this system where we now have a government figure that sets the starting point for working out what your housing needs are. And it's really important to understand that is a starting point. And it's not treated as a starting point by a lot of local authorities. It is treated as their mandatory target. It is not a mandatory target. And I think that's the brave thing that Elmbridge have done. They've recognised that this is the starting point, and they've worked back from that to see how much they can get into Elmbridge without compromising all the other bits. And I think, sadly, over the last 10 years, a lot of local plans have ended up as housing plans. They've been very much about where you can fit the housing in, rather than about creating good places. And I think that's why the reputation of planning and planners over the last 10 years has taken a really big dive, because we've not done our job. Our job is to place shape. It's to make good places. It's not just about ticking a box around numbers, or planning by numbers, as we call it. And I think the government has recognised that now. So moving on to sort of reforms and where we go with this, some of you will have heard about the planning white paper a couple of years ago, which decided that there would be mandatory housing targets, so the government would set the numbers and you wouldn't have any choice. And there was lots of other things in there, and a very quick backtrack from a lot of that, because it really hadn't been tested. It was the white paper wasn't a coherent bit of policy. It was very much a number of things thrown into the pot to make a massive change in the way that we plan, but it didn't work. And that has been, over the last 2 years, sort of slowly shoved into a corner. But there's some really good things that have come out of that. One is around the design side of things. And, design has gone right up the government's agenda in terms of how we do things. And I think you'll see a lot of that coming about. I think the local plan will talk a lot about design codes as we know it. Communities are being encouraged very much to get engaged with this, have a say, and really work with the local authorities on the design and quality of places. And it isn't just about the buildings, it's as much about the spaces between the buildings as it is about the physical structures. And that's the other good thing that the government is doing in terms of the changes. There's a lot more emphasis on what we technically call green infrastructure, but it is the open spaces, it's the green corridors, it's all the green things, the richness in biodiversity. And we've now got a new Environment Act, which is really going to boost local authorities' hands in terms of helping create much better, greener places. A lot of the emphasis is going to be on the developers. They're going to have to pay for an awful lot of it. We've got what we call biodiversity net gain, which again is a very techie term, but it basically says to developers, you've got to improve, there's got to be a net benefit in terms of the biodiversity for every single development that you do. And that's a good thing. It will be difficult, but it is a good thing. The other things that they are looking at is digital reform. So for access, for everybody that needs to access consultations or look at the local plan or applications, a lot of investment is going into doing that digitally. And I think that is, it will change the way in which we engage with the planning system. There's a lot of local authorities that are piloting things like digital design, so you can actually look at development and see what it looks like much better in terms of 3D, as opposed to what it looks like flat on a page. You don't get the sense and the feel of a place by that, but it is the next step up, and I think it will help communities engage much better with the system. So there's some good things coming out. We're going to hear about some of these big changes very soon, I think. There's going to be a new bill coming forward in May or June, and some things are going to be introduced through that route. There is a big debate around the housing numbers and what's going to happen there. For those that have heard levelling up, the big jargon, and a whole new department is now called the Department, or Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities, or DLUC, as it is affectionately known. That is, levelling up is very much about the Midlands and the North and investing in places like that. And a lot of the funding that traditionally comes our way to support a lot of the developments is going to be shoved elsewhere. But the quid pro quo that has been promised is that the housing numbers, or that starting point, will go down. Lots of debate about what that means. Some people have been told that means the numbers in places like Surrey would go down by 30%. Others are saying that the whole process will be scrapped by government and it will be up to individual local authorities to set that starting point in terms of what their needs are. But we don't know. Big emphasis still very much on affordable housing. And as you'll appreciate, in a place like this, it's never going to go away. But demand is insatiable in places like Elmbridge. It always has been. We will never, ever meet our needs in places like Elmbridge. Never. And it's sort of cloud cuckoo land to think that if we tick a box of an artificial number, that's the job done. A lot of this is about actually getting affordable housing, not about the numbers. I don't know if anybody's heard the A3 is referred to as Nappy Valley, because so many families are still coming from London. We don't know what the impact of COVID is. Lots of debate about people moving miles away and commuting less into London. What we're actually seeing is people moving closer to London, out of London, but still quite close to London. So there's been a sort of shift in the thinking around the impact of COVID, and I think that will increase the pressure on places like Elmbridge and Surrey generally. I think more people will still be looking to buy because it's still cheaper to buy in Cobham than it is to buy in Wimbledon. It's just the housing market that we live with. So Elmbridge, as Jerry said, it's taken a long time to get here, but in the course of the last year, I think that we've done a very big sprint to get the local plan over the line, and it's a good plan. There's a lot we still haven't seen yet, but fundamentally, its ambition is the right one for Elmbridge. It has got climate change and the environment at the heart of it, and if any of you've got children and grandchildren, you will know this is a really big issue for them, as is things like health and well-being. So these things play out really strongly in the local plan, so I think that's a really good thing. The vision and the level of ambition in it is right for Elmbridge. It's not going to release any greenbelt at the moment, and that was a hard-fought battle. And they've still got a long way to justify that, because most other local authorities around London are releasing greenbelt. And there's a lot of eyes on Elmbridge across the country to see how this plays out. But I think we have to have confidence in the council and the officers that they've got this. They've got a good case. So what happens next? The local plan, as you said, was agreed last night. It has got what we call site allocations in it. And one of the things that local plans have to do is they have to set out a 5 to 10 year supply of what we call deliverable sites. So these are sites that if the plan was adopted tomorrow, they could be developed tomorrow. Financially, they work and they're ready to be developed. And Elmbridge will have to make the case that they've got sufficient sites to do that. In the longer term, there will be sites, and probably quite a lot in Cobham, that will be in that next stage, and they will be developable sites. So these are sites that might not come forward in the first 10 years, but might come forward after that. Now, the important thing is none of these have got permission, or there might be the odd one that has a permission, but most of these are allocations of sites. They have still got to go through a full planning process. So they are, in principle, sites. And at local planning examination, so the plan now will go out to consultation in June, I think, May, June, after the elections. You will all have an opportunity to comment on it again, if you have already, or for the first time, please do. It's really important that you do. And at that point, all the comments will go to what we call planning inspector. Now, planning inspector is an independent inspector. And their role is to look at the plan objectively and decide whether it ticks all the boxes it's supposed to. So there are some legal requirements it has to tick. Make sure that the plan's not going to be challenged legally. Quite often they are. They have to make sure that what we call sound, so they have to basically do what the government expects it to do in terms of national policy. But it also has to reflect what Elmbridge want from their local plan. And if that wasn't the case, we'd just have one big local plan for every part of the country. It has to have that bit that says why Elmbridge is different, what is different about Elmbridge in terms of its needs and how it works. So that's a really important bit, and that also goes back to the sort of priorities of the council, and at the ballot box what the priorities were. So Greenbelt, obviously, protection of the Greenbelt, protection of green spaces, and lots of things like that will get tested. Developers will sit at the other right side of the table, fully armed with all their lawyers, and I have a lot of colleagues who are QCs and planning barristers who are all lining up already to take aim at the Elmbridge plan. There will be a lot of them there, but a lot of the time their interest is in individual sites. Some of them will challenge the housing numbers because obviously the more housing there is, the more sites there will be. So that will be the first big push. But a lot of them are really there representing clients, and they will do everything they can to make sure their sites are there. And if their sites aren't there, they've got an opportunity to argue the case that their site should be included. And that is when the whole argument about Greenbelt and housing numbers will play out, because again, we know that there is a lot of developers that own Greenbelt land that will be very disappointed last night about the fact their sites aren't there. I know on my patch, Long Ditton, one of the sites that was vulnerable early on in the local plan process is owned by Taylor Wimpey, who own Wisley. And they'll be very miffed that that's not there. So, you know, they will throw everything they can at it. But I think Elmbridge has got a good chance, and we shall see where it goes. So I'm not really intending to say anything else, but I'm more than happy to take questions or cover anything else that you want to cover. Do you want to do that now, or do you want to?
Let's open it up.
Or have I bored you all? Have I not done what I was supposed to do?
The gentleman over there.
I wonder whether the developments should have solar panels on their roofs right from the word go, rather than later, because of the situation we have at the moment, but also before that.
Yeah, I mean, energy supply is going to be a really interesting one in future. And today, I spent the day today, I'm a judge on the National Planning Awards, and I spent the day today looking through all the sort of the award entries, and there's a lot in there about energy supply, solar panels, and all different aspects, and making sure that development, housing developments are fit for future. And this is where the design comes into the Elmbridge plan and the design coding and things like that. There has to be a real push from the council around this to make sure that there is as much opportunity to make sure housing and any development is as sustainable as it can be in the future. Car parking is going to be another issue. You know, there is a lot of developments now coming forward, and several of the ones I judged today don't have any car parking. And the argument there is, well, people will, but if we're building them, we know there's a market out there. People want it. There's one near where I live, which has got no parking, and they will all sell because the people that choose to buy these they don't need parking, and it's become more and more young people, especially the closer you get to London and sort of where you've got more public transport, aren't so keen to own a car. And especially fuel prices keep going up, it's just too expensive. So that whole issue around energy supply is going to have to be factored in much, much more in future as we go forward. And there's some interesting sites in Elmbridge that were from the 90s that have got covenants on them that don't allow them to have solar panels, which is also an interesting one. Okay, one over there and one here.
We've seen some huge sea changes in the last couple of years with the COVID pandemic. Far fewer people commuting, far more people very uncertain, isn't it?
Yep, yeah, absolutely. I mean, housing markets, it always amazes me how many intelligent people argue demand and supply around housing. The more supply you provide, the cheaper it will be. And, you know, that's just rubbish, absolute rubbish. Housing markets are incredibly complex, and again, people choose to live where they are because they can get access to a wide range of employment, or schools, or, you know, green space, whatever. You know, they don't choose it just, you know, it's not a very binary decision. And I think the COVID experience has changed how people think about where they live. And there's a concept which is beginning to play out quite a lot in developments, which is it's 20-minute neighbourhood, but it's also 20-minute place, 15-minute neighbourhood. It's called all sorts of things. It's actually a really, really old planning concept, but it's found a new lease of life, which is basically saying you should be able to walk or cycle to all your services, to the supermarket and everything within 15 minutes. Now that's an interesting one. Again, talking about Waitrose, you know, there's going to be a lot more market for smaller supermarkets in neighbourhoods. People might not like that, but that is, I would rather walk to a small supermarket than get in my car and drive 15 minutes to a bigger one. So there's going to be a whole load of issues around that I think that will change the way that people live, and has to have an impact on the way we plan. But it's the housing is going to be, unless we get very clever about it, we're going to end up with every site in our areas as housing, and we won't actually have the space to make 20-minute neighbourhoods because it will just all be housing. Yep.
Katrina, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. I have to declare an interest in the councillor who voted for the plan last night from your colleagues here. I wonder if you would comment on the concept of consultation between local authorities, duty to consult on, and with a view to sharing housing markets, with particular reference to, dare I say, Wisley down the road. Thank you.
Yeah, so duty to cooperate is what the government put in place when they took away the regional strategies. They introduced this, it's supposed to be a voluntary cooperation between local authority areas to mop up unmet needs. So the fact that Elmbridge are proposing just over 70% of their housing target means, you know, the 30% needs to maybe go somewhere. That actually, this is going to be one of the testing ones, because the reason Elmbridge can't meet its needs is because it's greenbelt and it has set up a good, strong case for that, but so are all its neighbours. Guildford probably less so. It's got much more green belt around it that is arguably will have less impact if you lose it. So the duty to cooperate is something, it's a legal requirement that councils have to show that they've worked on an ongoing basis with their neighbouring authorities to try and meet as many of the needs across the whole area as possible. But it also operates at a more local level, and I think with Wisley it's going to be an interesting one, because when Guildford considered its local plan, the duty to cooperate worked out in terms of, it was all arguments about numbers. So Guildford took a little bit of Woking's numbers and a little bit of Waverley's numbers. They didn't take any of Elmbridge's numbers. But it didn't play out in terms of the fact that Wisley is slam bang on Elmbridge's border, and the fact that most people living in Wisley are either going to travel into Woking town centre to get the train up to London, or they're going to go to North Surrey into Elmbridge, and particularly to places like Cobham. So I think there has to be a case made by Elmbridge around, it's more of a strategic planning case as opposed to a duty to cooperate case. It's basically saying we're not meeting our needs in full, but we've got a 4,000 new community right on our doorstep. So, you know, if you're going to need more housing, it's there, and it's all the investment in infrastructure and everything's already going into that. So whilst it might not have been a good idea in the first place, you know, it is actually going to benefit Elmbridge. It should benefit Elmbridge, I think, in terms of the case that they make at an examination. But they are also, you know, they've still got the high-level duty to cooperate case, and that is always the first thing that's tested at an examination, and it's the only thing that will if you fail the duty to cooperate at your first session at an examination, the plan doesn't pass go, so you don't even go into the next stage of the examination, you go back to the start. So the local authority is basically told to go away and start again. So it's a really, really, really important bit that the Elmbridge need to get right. And I haven't seen any of the evidence yet, but I'm confident that they've done their bit.
Question over there.
Yep.
Can you give some indication when the process with maybe the public would be able to see some of the material in there?
In terms of the local plan, well, I think from what I understand, it's June. Is that right? Consultation. So it would be a 6-week consultation in June. I'm sure Jerry and others will make sure absolutely everybody knows when it's published and available. But I think they have to wait till after the elections in May before they can do anything. Any other comments?
Jolly good, Katrina. That has been absolutely super. It's given us a really good view. Well done. Thank you very much indeed. Next, Adrian, do you want to say anything on this? Okay, right.
Yes, good evening. Last time I stood in this church making a similar presentation, it was with James Brown, and it was 3 or 4 years ago when we were being asked to consult on one of the stages of evolution of this local plan. And we were there advocating that what Elmbridge should do is adopt what they were then calling option 4. And indeed the local plan that's now been voted on and accepted last night unanimously by the council is a version of option 4. So we kind of won that campaign. So everybody who was here and many others besides, thank you. I think we got the right answer. So the answer about when can you see the local plan, you can actually see it now. The local plan is in many separate bits. So the plan itself is visible if you go to Elmbridge's website. The front page has got a click through, so you can click through there to read the actual document, which is the overview document. It's backed up by thousands of pages of evidence. And that evidence is also largely available. You can find that on the evidence website. But there are still several pieces of the evidence which are secret. And when Katriona was saying we don't know yet, well, there are bits that are still secret that will not be released until they do the public consultation. The councillors have been able to see those bits. They have a separate sort of councillors only website, and they've been doing that since about December, I believe. So what was voted on last night is the high-level document, the master document, lots and lots of detail, and more detail beside, but we'll get to see that in a few months' time, after the elections. So I just wanted to sort of add a bit of Cobham flavour to what was adopted last night. No Greenbelt was lost. We've been campaigning against losing Greenbelt in Cobham now for 6 or even 8 years, because one of the big pieces of Greenbelt around here with Chippings Farm was up for a separate proposal from a developer long before the local plan was even being debated. So we've all been campaigning against loss of Greenbelt for a long time. And what was voted on last night saves all of our Greenbelt, so thank you for that. I should just caveat that one little bit and just point out that we've saved the Greenbelt as far as Elmbridge is concerned. That Elmbridge's local plan has yet to go through the inspection process. If it doesn't get past the inspector, it can get kicked back to Elmbridge to be done again. And when it's if he kicks it back and says you've got to put more houses in it, they'll have to find somewhere to put those houses. So it's not a done deal. When it comes to the inspection, we'll have to all put our heads together about how to campaign to make sure he doesn't do that. But that is one possible outcome. What is in the local plan is this option 4 number of, approximately the option 4 number of 454 dwellings per annum, not the 644 that the latest government sort of suggestion number is. And that 30% difference is what we were just talking about, that Elmbridge has got to put a very strong case to the inspector as to why it should not build the rest. And I've had various people discuss this with me since all this was coming to fruition. I just wanted to make the absolute point that Elmbridge had no option. The first 454 houses that were going to be built anywhere in Elmbridge had to be in the urban area. There was no option to say, let's put some of those on the green belt and have less in the urban area. That was never an option. The option was 454 in the urban area, plus some more if you want, to go all the way up to 644 in the green belt. What Elmbridge have chosen to do is fight to say, no, we'll do the 454, which we can do in the urban area, but we're not going to do the rest. And we're hoping that the inspector will accept that argument. Where the extra houses would go if the inspector insists on it, well, obviously Greenbelt, but maybe also even more into the urban area. And there's lots of campaigns around, we don't want high-rise buildings in Walton Town Centre, that kind of thing. But those are the options that would have to be considered if the number comes back above 454. So what does Cobham get out of it? Well, we have to, over the next 15 years, absorb 825 new houses somewhere in Cobham during that time. Not houses, these are dwellings. Quick calculations tell me that that's about 11% of the total number that have to go somewhere in Elmbridge. We came out about halfway up the league table. Some came up much better than the 11.8%. Poor old Walton came off worse at about 17%. The Walton number is very swollen, however, by the home-based development, which is within their number in the way the things work. So the home-based development of about 100 of those houses is within that number too. So the message I think we should all take away is this is so much better than any of us could have expected a couple of years ago, if it goes through. Much better than all of us, many of us were fearing, and we should thank everybody, the council, the councillors, all the campaign groups for that outcome. Next slide. There's been some discussion about one of the things that's in the local plan, as you'll see it if you go and look on the website, is a list of what is called allocated sites. Think of these as sites that have been granted a sort of an outline planning permission. So in principle, these sites have all been told, you can build that number of dwellings on your site, but you've got to come forward with an application that shows us what they'll look like, how all the other aspects will work on those sites. So they're not planning permissions, but they are indications that the principle at least would not be refused. As far as Cobham and Downside and Oxshott and Stoke Dablin is concerned, in the short term, this is the list. I would say not a bad list for us. These are the ones that are most likely to happen in the first 10 years. The first one, up by the care home on the roundabout as you go out towards the A3, going out via Oxshott, that one's already in a planning application phase. And Jerry's already talked about Cedar House, although the local plan as written, says it would provide 5 incremental units over and above Cedar House as it is now. We're given to understand it will end up as 3 units altogether, so there's a bit of arithmetic that needs to be rounded out there. But that plan we're very pleased to see going forward, because as Jerry said, otherwise that house will fall into disrepair, even more disrepair. Many of the other short-term developments that are on this allocated site list, all of the others, are garages. And as Jerry said, well, there are quite a few houses in Cobham that don't have garages attached to them, and they probably don't have parking on site within those smaller, older buildings, but they had lock-up garages somewhere else. Well, all those lock-ups are down to be redeveloped into houses. That will mean that the parking that those houses presently enjoy will disappear. So there's a considerable campaign we might have to enter into to make sure that enough parking goes with these housing developments, not only for the developments themselves, but also for the displaced garaging. So that will be a point we'll have to watch out for over the next year or two. Next slide. Yeah, sorry. One site that's on the allocated site list is the Sheargold development for even more units than is proposed by that development itself. There's been a lot of campaigning against that development. It hasn't yet been in front of the council, so we don't know how the application will go, but it has now been granted a sort of an outline planning consent. I don't think I want to comment on any of the others. Safe to say, developments like the Village Hall Community Centre, which are on the list for additional housing, they are on the list with some words which aren't very complete, and we'll probably see that in one of these secret documents later. But what the words effectively make me believe is what the council intend to do is to replace those buildings with buildings that provide the same amenity, but plus add some dwellings to them. So don't panic about those, but when the plans come forward, we really must make sure that they do provide the amenity values that they used to provide, and hopefully more so. Thank you, Richard. And then there are a lot of others that are in the longer term, and these are 11 years from now. And as Jerry said, who knows what the shopping habits and all those things will be. So I've had a lot of people ask me about some of these as if they're tomorrow. I think the Surrey Advertiser did us no good there. The Surrey Advertiser had Waitrose is going to be demolished as one of its sort of points in its article about this local plan. It's hypothetical. It's 11 years from now, and it will only happen if their numbers say so. And Waitrose own it. They're not planning to do it. Thank you, Richard. So moving on from the local plan.
Shall we just stop and see if there are any questions
Okay.
at all so far before we put the local plan to bed? Any further comments at all, or is everybody relaxed with the level of information that they're getting?
The thing that puzzles me about removing garages is how does this fit with the move to encourage everyone to have electric cars which need charging?
Well, I think that's a very good point, and as I said, the houses that use detached, lock-up garages somewhere else, which are the ones that are under suggestion, and as I said, that amenity has to be provided in addition to the parking for the new housing. They would have probably wanted to do their charging in those garages, right? So there is, as Katrina said, one of the chapters in this local plan is all about climate change, net zero and all that stuff. There's a lot in there about how much we want that to be taken care of, but not much detail about how it will be taken care of. Perhaps some of that detail will be in some of these more secret documents later. We don't know.
Jolly good. Okay, let's move on. Thank you very much, Adrian. Next.
So I was just going to touch on one. I'm sure everyone has seen the planning lists that we've been dealing with recently. I've been asked to comment on one this evening that's up for decision. It's very complicated. So there is a proposal to. Everyone will know that Challenge Fencing is having to move out of their facility in Downside because of the housing development that was approved in Downside. And one of the proposals that's come forward is that they would move that business into the mini garage at the station. There are lots of challenges about that site, not least there's a great big electricity pylon in the back garden, so housing is out of the question on that site. Housing would be a lovely solution for the use of that site, but it can't be unless somebody's going to pay the electricity people a lot of money to move that pylon. Challenge are proposing to go in there, and to do that they would have to make a few changes to the place. Its business is similar in lots of ways to the mini business that was there. Big delivery lorries, customers backwards and forwards, where do they park and all those things. But it's also very different. It's a slightly more industrial type business that they run. They have a lot of goods that are much harder to, much easier to take. So I think they'll want lots of security fencing and the rest of it for their stock. So it's going to be quite a challenge to decide upon that planning application. It's very complicated. Anyone who's there's a lot of residents already objected to it, but anyone who's interested in that should go and look at the site and make their own comments, I think. Thank you, Richard. So I just want to touch on this one other thing. You will perhaps all remember that a year or so ago there was a consultation about changing the parliamentary boundaries. So Cobham in that proposal would be moved from the Esher and Walton constituency into the Chertsey and Weybridge constituency, or sort of a new constituency. We objected then. We didn't think that was a good idea. We thought that keeping our whole community settlement, as Elmbridge call it, together is the way forward. Anyway, there's a second round of consultation presently underway. I know several of the other local groups. I, on behalf of the CCHT, also made a presentation to the commissioners. And they, next slide, Richard. They're looking at different things. We think that the right way forward is the Esher constituency's got too many people in it. So some people have got to be moved out of that constituency and probably into the Weybridge one. And the right people to move are the other half of Hersham that are not presently planned to be moved. The other half of Hersham all of Hersham is upset that they're being broken up, just as I think Cobham Oxshott is being upset that it's being broken up. So it seems bizarre that they're breaking up two communities instead of keeping two communities together in that proposal, and that was the essence of what I presented to the Boundary Commission. Next slide, Richard. But if any of you got different views, they've opened up a consultation. It's quite fun to do. You go onto this site. There's a big map. You click down until you get to you give your postcode. It gives you a map of the area. You click on it and it asks you what would you do. So it's quite fun to do. So anyone who would like to put in a comment about how the boundaries should be reorganised in our area, that's where you do it at Boundary Commission England reviews.org.uk by the end of next week. So that's all I was going to say.
Thank you very much indeed, Adrian, for covering some fairly heavy ground in such an effective way. Even if you have already made comments on the Boundary Commission proposals last autumn, you can still make comments on this. And we'll be doing a note to all our members. It is important that you make comments about this. I know this is mainly a political issue, and the political groupings will carry much more weight in their comments. But we as a community must put in our comments, and so we will be encouraging all of you to do so, and we'll be writing to you in the next day or two. That brings to the end our discussions on all planning matters, and so can I again thank Catriona so eloquently covering a difficult area, and Adrian for digging down into the detail. And we see where we go from here. There can't be massive changes probably now, but there's still quite a bit to be sorted out. The whole area of green spaces need to be sorted out, and there will be discussions on lots of these other smaller aspects. Where we've benefited in our area previously is windfall sites, windfall developments. These are developments that have not been on any of these lists or any of these plans, and they come from out of the blue, and they've always solved the need. And many people believe that the way forward will be probably a significant contribution from these windfall sites that hopefully will take some of the pressure off some of the ones on the list that you may find difficulty with. But that list is, again, hopefully to keep the inspector happy. Is that right? Or am I putting words into your mouth?
I suspect it's to keep the inspector happy and all the people that have, all the landowners and developers that have got options on all these sites.
So there you go. Let's see how we get on. We will keep you informed. There will be a part for all of you to play. Thank you again, both of you. And now I'd like to ask Elizabeth Kennedy to come up and talk about Jubilee Day. Thank you very much. Stay for some drinks.
Right, well, hello everyone. Yes, after 2 years we are now planning Jubilee Day to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee that weekend on the Saturday on the 4th. And we are planning to have a picnic on the Leg of Mutton Field, and it will be very much like Jubilee Day, but it will largely be limited to the Leg of Mutton Field. Although, as Jerry has already said, there will be some activity in the church. It will be from 11 till 4, as usual. There will be lots of lovely entertainment, lots of stall holders. We'll be entertaining 50 residents who we think deserve a free meal, and we hope everyone will come and join in. The duck race will happen, as it usually does, at 4 o'clock. So we will have to try and direct everyone from the field to River Hill if they want to go. However, we have been very concerned about COVID, potentially still problems with the pandemic, still the need to have social distancing. So we put our thinking caps on and we've come up with an IT solution. We are going to have the duck race filmed, both statically and we hope with a drone as well, and simultaneously it will be downloaded onto YouTube. So those of you with a smartphone will be able to sit in the field and see the duck race. Or if you happen not to be here and want to watch it sitting at home, you could do that too. So that's a new thing that will be happening this year. Other than that, it is very much, of course, like Heritage Day, so you all know what that means. And that, of course, does mean we want lots of help from volunteers. So we do have a list of people who are on our volunteer system, but you might not be on it. If you are able to help on the day or selling duck tickets in advance, please come and see me, tell me about it, and we will include you when we ask for volunteers to do particular jobs. I am in particular looking for somebody who would be in charge of manning the river for the duck race. I'm hoping to have the police cadets along, which will look rather good in their uniforms, but they are youngsters and they do still need direction. So we might have them helping to control the crowds and perhaps offering some direction from the leg of mutton field. But somebody to be in charge of that. I'm looking for somebody to be in charge of launching ducks. That's for Jerry, of course. And he also wants somebody to help with duck collection. That's really important. We would like this time to have somebody else to help with managing the leg of mutton field, maybe 1 or 2 there. Somebody to manage things like posters. Other than that, a lot of it is selling duck tickets, which I know a lot of you have already done. This year, for the first time, we are also going to donate half of what we raise to Cobham Combined Charities. That is a charity that that Mike Branscombe chairs. It is a local charity that was originally set up to support the poor of Cobham, and it aims to help people who have an immediate need for something. It does a lot of help with domestic abuse people who come into Cobham, probably people many of you don't know about, others who have particular problems, like there is one man they quoted who couldn't cook any food because he didn't have a cooker and he couldn't afford to buy another one, and so they bought him a cooker. It's that sort of immediate help, and that's very akin to another charity I work with in Walton who also do that sort of help. And I think it does also highlight that we have a lot of people who are not particularly wealthy in Cobham, and they do have particular needs, and I'm really keen that we try and promote this so that more is given to the less wealthy in Cobham than is usually the case. So that's generally where we're at. We look forward to seeing you all on the 4th of June. If anybody wants to ask me a question, please do.
Thank you very much indeed, Elizabeth. So Elizabeth needs you to come forward to offer your services for volunteering. There are no strict requirements. It's always good fun. Selling duck tickets is always good fun. We also have to relabel some of the ducks' bottoms because the labels have come off, and so we'll be doing that during May. That's a very simple job, just sitting in our garden and putting fresh labels on, but again it needs people to come forward. We can only do these sort of things if people come forward and help, and it's always good fun, always good time to have a chin wag and put the world to rights. So please can you see Elizabeth afterwards and just give her your name and phone number and we can get you onto the volunteering system. Please do that. That brings me on to any other business. Are there any items of other business? Yes.
Jerry, I'd just like to raise one point. Heritage means lots of things. Historical heritage, the built environment, a lot of CCHD work has been on the built environment as we've had tonight, but it also includes the natural environment. And I feel that more could be done in Cobham, albeit with a rich panoply of organisations. The natural environment is not getting its fair shake. And there are areas of degraded land and where improvements could be made all around us. There's one just down the road there by Downside Bridge, which is awful, and something could be done. We had plans, they had to be put into abeyance because of the pandemic. But I do feel that more could be done for the natural environment, and it fits in with what Catriona said about, care of green spaces and open spaces, and I would encourage some real thinking of the present trustees of Cobham Heritage, how they could use all their powers to kind of hopefully meet some of these needs.
You're absolutely right, Howard. The natural environment has always been important, and it's never more important than it is at the moment. And it's something that we have to, and we must, and we should develop resource to. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we have places on our board, and we do need people who have got an interest in these areas to come forward, because the projects that we do are projects that people want to be involved in. So if you feel strongly about something, come along, talk about the project, and we will do that project. Somebody saw the mausoleum in a terrible state over in the far part of the borough, the Samaritans Mausoleum, and we went into action immediately, and with their assistance we got Surrey geared up, and the area, and Elmbridge, and it's now getting cleared and so on. So River Hill, all that work started because one member of the community was keen on it, came forward, joined the board, and we gave all the support needed. That's how we work. If somebody is keen on something, come forward, we'll give you the support. There are the SIL funds available for this sort of thing, and it's a question of finding people who are keen. Rather than thinking about it, just come forward and we'll give you the wherewithal to get this sort of thing moving. So, highly agree with you, Howard. Be wonderful to get that moving. Any other questions? That just leaves me to repeat that with our retirements, we are going to need a new membership secretary. It's a lovely job because you're dealing with people. Edna is very happy to keep things going until we find someone, but we need to get somebody in before the next renewal time in the autumn, and she will work with that person as they take it over. So could all of you please think whether you would like to take on this job. It's good fun. Our meetings aren't boring. They're always fairly lively. I can't recommend them more, but then you expect me to say that, wouldn't you? But seriously, we need a membership secretary. We need somebody to do the blue plaques. If there are people on the environmental side who would like to do projects, come along. So please don't just go walking out of the door if you've got the skills and the time to help us further. And it's always good to get a bit of fresh blood onto the board. We've got somebody who's going to be joining us to help Adrian on the planning side, because that's been really stressful since poor old David Belchamber passed away. So there is plenty of room for anyone to come forward and help, so please do come forward. So that remains for me to thank again Mike for allowing us to use this wonderful building, probably the most important of our historic buildings. And it's a real living building, it's a real heritage building. Heritage is not just the past, it's the present and the future. And this church embodies all of that. So thank you, Mike. Thank you, Richard, for all you've done to get this up and running on the electronic side, and everybody else who's contributed to this. Again, to Catriona, and to thank all of you for coming along. Please join us for a drink over here, and there are some lovely nibbles as well. And it's just wonderful to be back meeting you all physically again after 2 years of Zooming. We're all zoomed out, so jolly good. Thank you all very much indeed for coming along.